You're listening to China Africa Talk.
Jambo, ni Bridget akikuletea kipindi kinachohusiana na China na Afrika.
Vous écoutez le dialogue sino-africain avec Bridget.
Everything China, everything Africa.
Olá, você está ouvindo China Africa Talk com Bridget.
سيداتي وسادتي مرحبا بكم في الحوار الصيني العربي مع بريدجيت.
Welcome back to the program. This is China Africa Talk. I'm your host, Bridget Mutambirwa, coming to you from the Chinese capital in Beijing, and I bring you discussions on what's happening with China and Africa from a Chinese and African perspective. The world's first and largest comprehensive fair for trade and services takes place in Beijing from September the 10th to the 14th. Themed Embrace Intelligent Technologies, Empower Trade and Services, the 2025 China International Fair for Trade and Services has attracted participants from 85 countries and international organizations. African exhibitors are seizing the chance to explore new opportunities with China and showcase the continent's unique strengths in global service trade.
When we go and engage at some of these expos, how do you connect the two nations? How do we create opportunities? Make sure that they can also engage at the same levels. What products can we actually also provide to the Chinese market?
This is actually my second time at CIFTIS. What really struck me this year is how much more diverse and dynamic the expo has become.
So how can traders from Africa position themselves as active innovators and strategic partners in this tech-driven service revolution? I'm now joined by Titus Nampala, CEO of the Namibia Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and Emma Mutijima, a Rwandan coffee exporter and CEO of Phoenix Ventures Limited. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
So I'll begin with you there, Mr. Mutijima. How many times have you participated in this expo? What stood out to you the most at this year's fair? And perhaps what is the most important connection or deal you hope to take home?
Thank you. This is actually my second time at CIFTIS. The first time was already a success. We met valuable partners and got to introduce Rwandan coffee to new audience in China. And what really struck me this year is how much more diverse and dynamic the expo has become.
Okay.
You can really feel the global energy here, especially around technology and sustainability. For us, the goal isn't just to find buyers. The goal is also to connect with long-term partners who want to build sustainable supply chains that can benefit not just our companies, but also the farmers' communities back in Rwanda. We are two companies, both selling coffee. We are not just bringing beans, as I had mentioned. We're also bringing the story of our farmers here and our culture. And I feel like being on this global stage, there is a lot of companies like with expertise in different things. For example, in logistics, in packaging, and all that. So for us, we're gonna find many people that are also in the same sector as us in agriculture, and we can learn more about them, and we can take all these skills back home and go add value and reduce what we import, and then we add more of what we can also bring on the Chinese market.
Beyond just sales, why is this so valuable for African brands to showcase unique products like Rwandan coffee or handicrafts on a global stage? I know for sure that many African countries will be showcasing handicrafts, sculptures, fabric, a lot of agricultural products from their home countries. You've also just mentioned how this is not just about sales.
First of all, as you know, Rwanda has the best coffee.
I can agree to that one.
We would like also to share with the rest of the world with the best of our coffee. As I've said, it's about more than just sales. It's about telling our story. When we bring Rwandan coffee to these CIFTIS, we are not just bringing beans, as I had mentioned. We are bringing the story of our farmers, the story of our culture, and the resilience of our people. Global stages like this, they are so powerful because they allow our African brands to show the world that our product can also carry identity and African pride. I can say it's more about building the bridges, not just only closing the deals. We've been also attending many exhibitions.
Okay.
And so far we have received a positive feedback on Rwandan coffee and also other Rwandan agricultural products. For example, like even honey, Rwandan tea, and Rwandan chili. For me, who is dealing in coffee, so far, China is a growing market, and so, as you know, it's a vast market. And we are receiving the feedback, and that's why you see us keep coming hit on this market.
Now, over to you there, Mr. Nampala. In your view, how does an expo like CIFTIS create tangible win-win economic opportunities that ultimately benefit people in both Namibia and China?
Thanks, Bridget. So I think it's really a good expo, but the one thing I would say is, the availability and coordinating that I think it's quite critical. And I don't think this is just a Namibian case, but it probably applies across multiple jurisdictions across the continent. On your second question, in terms of, what economic opportunities could we take in this expo? Again, I think whether it's Namibia or you look across Africa, the one thing that we share with the Chinese is that we are people of culture.
Right.
The Chinese, it's a 6,000 cultural history. Africans probably can claim up to, 2,000 culture that has been documented. So now it's a question of when we go and engage at some of these expos. So one of the things I would say, how do you connect the two nations? Where do we export our culture? And that could really be in various forms. I would say that's the first one. The second part is looking at creating win-win economic opportunities. I think anybody in Africa or in Namibia in particular would know the Chinese involvement, what China has done across multiple of our jurisdictions. If you come to Namibia, you would see we have good roads. Most of those has been in partnership with the Chinese. But now, how do we create opportunities for our entrepreneurs to make sure that they can also engage at the same levels? What products can we actually also provide to the Chinese market who might be at different levels of entrepreneurship, whether that be a small entity or that be large corporates in our markets? You might be aware that Namibia was actually the first African country to be allowed to export beef into China, which we think has been a great success. And we have built up on that with now being allowed to export goat meat as well as mutton from this year. And that really comes from a lot of hard work, a lot of engagement between our two governments and the private sector. So there's a lot of opportunities that we also can take advantage of as Africans, as Namibians. I think the one thing that we also need to start doing is really kind of educating the Chinese market or showcasing what is it that we can offer beyond mineral resources. I think most of the time when we engage with our Chinese peers or when people think about the Africa-Chinese relationship, usually we think mineral resources and the conversation ends there. But there's more to the relationship. And I think in the background, there is a lot that both countries are doing. There's a lot of trade that's ongoing. This year, Namibia is the FOCAC host country. And there has been a lot of discussions. There has been a lot of trade deals that have been signed. We just hosted the Chinese delegation of business entities in Windhoek. So there is a lot that's happening, but at the same time, there is more that we can do. And I think an expo like this is something that's really great and that we should take advantage of. As Africans, usually we want to showcase ourselves as single markets, but China is a very, very big market. And I think as Africans, we really need to start thinking, how do we showcase as a region, perhaps as a continent, so whether that be in SADC, whether that be EAC in East Africa, whether that be ECOWAS in West Africa, but we really need to see how do we leverage our strengths and how do we best showcase with our Chinese counterparts.
Can you perhaps share with us a success story? What was the one critical factor that made a specific China-Africa service partnership work so well? I know you've also just had a similar fair in your country, the Namibia-China Fair for Investment and Trade.
Thanks, Bridget. To my mind, the first thing is, as a country, the success we have had in the agricultural space, we have expanded that way now. We have zero tariffs as a country when we're exporting to China. Now, the question is, what do we actually want to export? And that's why we are expanding the products that we are offering to China, especially in the agricultural space. We're signing deals in terms of the green energy. As you would know, Namibia has a lot of sun and there has been deals already signed where, leveraging the Namibian natural resource, which is the sun. And then China is obviously the leading manufacturer of solar panels.
Right.
And it's not just a question of China supplying us with solar panels, but really making sure that there is technology transfer, that there is local involvement, and that most of those panels, we get them to be assembled here in Namibia. There's quite a number of success stories. I mentioned, the infrastructure upgrades as well. As we are speaking, there's a long upgrade of a water facility from northern Namibia, which is over 200 kilometers again. It's a partnership between the two governments, obviously with the involvement of the private sector.
Okay. Now I'm going to ask this question to both of you. What unique strengths does Africa offer in the world of services and trade, and how can partnerships with China help showcase these strengths on a global scale? Perhaps I'll start with you there, Mr. Mutijima.
I can say first, Africa's greatest strength lies in its people, particularly its young, vibrant, and creative population. The generation is redefining the continent across multiple sectors, from digital services and fintech, tourism, fashion, and also creative arts. African entrepreneurs are resourceful and adaptive, often innovative with also limited resources, which gives us an edge in creating a scalable and practical solution.
All right.
So what China brings to the table is the ability to scale.
Okay.
Whether through platforms, infrastructure, or global networks. By combining Africa's creativity and entrepreneurial spirit with China's experience in scaling and also executing at speed, I can say we can create a powerful synergy. And this partnership can help African services not only to thrive locally, but also to gain visibility and recognition on the global stage. So what I can say is that Africa has the ideas and innovation.
Okay.
And China has the platform and reach. And together we can showcase African strength to the world in a way that neither side could not achieve alone.
Okay. Your insights there, Mr. Nampala. Mr. Mutijima has just, he's highlighted that Africa's strength is in its people. And, we have ideas and innovation. What are your thoughts on this?
Thanks, Mr. Mutijima. I think I would concur with you, and I would also start with the number one strength that I think Africa has as a continent is across the globe. If you look at all the continents, we are the only continent that's growing in terms of population.
Right.
And if you look at our population bell curve, what I mentioned, you would see that our youth are still the largest part. Right. And again, that's different. There is no other continent that would say that. Now, when we speak, usually we hear a lot about the demographic dividend, which I think it's a real thing, and I think we must take advantage of that. Obviously, there are challenges that we need to address in terms of economic growth, but if you get it right, and when we speak with our international peers, if we can actually get them to understand that if you have a young population,
right,
people who will be economically active for longer. Now, that's a market that's waited to be tapped.
Right.
For us as Africans, what do we do with that? What can we offer to the rest of the world, whether this be the Chinese, whether this be Asia, whether this be Europe, whether this be the Americas? So I think that's really the first starting point. And when, I like the fact that you spoke about services. When you think about the Asian tigers and how they grew, including China itself, is the bulk of that was in its human capital, in its talent, sending people out over the globe to go and learn specific skills and be able to actually use that as part of its addition to the GDP of a specific country.
Right.
Now, that's part one. The part two I already spoke about in terms of a market that's growing, that's waiting for products. And that should be, on both sides of the coin, right? So what do we as Africans, what do we do with that market? And then for our partners, how do they take advantage of that? So for me, that would be part one.
Okay.
Part two, as a continent, we sit at the center of the world. So logistically, if you want to send products anywhere in the world, it means that somehow, whether it's shipping, maybe flights, you can say here and there. But again, if you look at even your flight trajectories, a lot of them go around Africa. So how do we take advantage of that? And if we're saying that we have a growing population, we have a growing market that's, there to consume and produce products, how do we connect to the world? So, in Namibia, we are upgrading our ports. I know that the same is happening in Dar es Salaam. Mombasa is doing the same. Now, the key thing is, as Africans, how do we actually make sure that we are coordinated and we are not competing against each other, but that we really leverage our strengths, that we can say, how do we make sure that we're using the port of Wildfish Bay as efficiently as possible with the port of Lobito, with the port of Dar es Salaam to connect to our landlocked countries?
Well, thank you for that there, Mr. Nampala. Over to you, Mr. Mutijima. The zero tariff policy is a major opportunity. You mentioned that earlier as well there, Mr. Nampala. How can African countries improve their local business environment to turn this trade advantage into attracting Chinese investment in manufacturing and services?
For example, this lies in policies.
Okay.
For example, we need to see where we are lacking or where we need more investments, and then we put more incentives in order to attract more investors. For example, like exempting taxes in different sectors. For example, if I give the example of Rwanda. For Rwanda, we are trying to promote green transport. Now, for us to be able to attract investors who are going to invest in green sector, we have exempted the import taxes. For example, if you're going to come and assemble electric cars or electric bikes, they are going to exempt you from import taxes. And this is also going to help the country. It's going to help our country to align the goals of the sustainable development goals of reducing carbon emissions.
Okay.
I can say to attract more investors, it lies more in policies and creating more incentives and a good environment for investors, a safe environment. For example, for our countries in Africa, I can say there's still some countries which are not stable. And also making our countries stable, it's also another thing that can help to attract investors, because also they prefer the safety of their investments. And I can say and emphasize in the stability of the country and good policies for the country.
Okay. Mr. Nampala, do you think platforms like CIFTIS help African countries not just export more, but also produce more for themselves and reduce import dependence?
Absolutely, Bridget. I completely agree with you. And I've shared this actually over a number of public platforms that, Africa must look to start producing. And sometimes that starts at home, right? It might be that we start as a country, we start as a regional bloc, but we must stop being consumers of other people's products without producing anything for ourselves.
Right.
The key starting point is always you must produce food for yourself. I believe that, sustainability and food security is very important. So I think that's important that we start looking at how do we complement what we're already getting, but really starting at the point of saying, yes, we might look at exporting some food stuff, but can we at least feed our population? So I think that's part one. The second part is, we live in a world that's rapidly advancing technologically. And maybe it's a good thing that, we're talking about an expo in China, and we have seen how China has advanced in the last 30 years technologically. And they didn't go back to reinvent the wheel. They went around the world. So we must do that as well. We must not try and reinvent the wheel where some things are already available, but how do we adapt them? When we do speak with our partners, how do we make sure that these trade deals that we are getting, these investment deals that we are getting, we're not only simply asking for employment, that if you employ X number of our people, that's great. But really that we have local involvement of local businesses that, is sustainable, that will be inclusive, and that would last a lifetime for our countries. I think that's really important. In terms of production, we have an opportunity to learn from our peers, especially the Chinese, but also the international partners on, how did they develop. And also when they do come and invest in our economies, that there is technology transfer in whatever shape or form that can occur, and that will help us to be self-sustainable at some point.
Let's discuss tourism as a service. Now, Mr. Nampala, how big of an impact has Chinese tourism had on your local economy, and what are you doing as Namibia to attract more Chinese visitors?
Thank you, Bridget. So again, this is To my mind, this is an untapped market for us.
Okay.
Obviously, the Chinese visitors have been ticking up. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but if I remember correctly, we have probably welcomed over 2,000 Chinese this year alone. But we want to grow that number.
Right.
We really want to grow that number. We know that, the Chinese, you have a lot of people who have become very wealthy, who are looking at experiencing other cultures. And you would have seen that we, as a country, through our National Tourism Board, we have been marketing Namibia not only to the Chinese, but to the Asian market as well, which we think is a growing market. But again, this reinforces why we need to also look at these things as a region. If somebody is flying from Beijing, they probably only don't want to come to Namibia, but they would want to see a few of the other countries within Southern Africa.
Right.
So as neighbors, how do we make sure that we tap into that market? We are improving our visa regime. In fact, I think the government is looking at how can they make it easier for the Chinese tourists to come and visit Namibia, visa-free rather, for I believe for 30 days. So this is an important market for us. And obviously tourism is a big contributor to our GDP. And it's something that is critical even for the President of the Republic herself.
Okay. Just to wind up our discussion, I'm going to ask both of you this question. Now, this year's theme of the CIFTIS is technology. Now, how can African nations be more than just adopters, but active innovators and partners in this tech-driven service revolution with China? I'll start off there with you, Mr. Mutijima.
Thank you, Bridget. Africa is already showing that we can also be innovators. Using Rwanda as an example, we have built Irembo. Irembo is a digital platform where almost all government services are now online.
Right.
And also I can talk about mobile money is another African success story, across the African continent. It transformed how people send and receive money, even in rural areas where traditional bank cannot easily reach. And now with also clean mobility, I'll give another example again of Rwanda, which is also active, as I had mentioned, pushing for electric cars and motorbikes.
Right.
And all this is to encourage the shift. And our government also is putting more incentives, as I had mentioned, on electric vehicles and making it easier for companies to bring in green technologies. What this shows is that we are not waiting for others to innovate for us. We are creating solutions tailored to our realities. Work with China, which is very advanced in areas like AI, e-commerce, and green technology. This gives us a chance to co-create instead of being just adapters. Africa can also stand as an eco partner in this new digital and sustainable economy.
And how about your thoughts there, Mr. Nampala?
Sure. Thanks, Bridget. Again, I would agree with my fellow panelists here that we have always been innovators. And again, I'll go back to the point I made earlier that we don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel, but we need to look at what do we have available, where do we need to go. So essentially, really starting with the end in mind. If I look at Namibia, for example, we have one of the largest deposits of rare earth minerals. Now, we know that this is what's powering AI. And we know that AI is the future, at least, for the next couple of decades, most likely, that, most of the things that we use will be based on chips, and that's AI. And that's, the first starting point of that is the rare earth minerals. I was actually reading at a report comparing how many engineers China is producing compared to the US. And I believe China is producing something around 1,800 compared to somewhere in the 800s or sub 1,000 for the US. And obviously these are just two countries, but it's the two leading global powers, why it makes sense. So now the question is, as Africans, how much are we investing in whether, when I say engineering, this will be very broad,
right?
But how much are we investing in our technical capacities? The country, we're speaking a lot about beneficiating our minerals. As you might know, Namibia has the third largest deposit of uranium. Now, if you were to beneficiate uranium, there is a lot of technology around that. So how do we take advantage of that? Again, starting with the end in mind. I can go a bit into it, but really what the point I was trying to make here is The countries that have advanced, and China is a very good example here. Its neighbor South Korea is another good example. And why I really used uranium is to say that these countries started nuclear power programs and beneficiating uranium, not necessarily because they were looking at the nuclear power as the end in itself, but how this actually helps them to advance and leapfrog technologically some of their global peers. Now, as a country in Namibia, we are also looking at this and say, what do we use at the moment and how do we use that to leapfrog and not necessarily go through each stage of technological advancement? If we need to beneficiate uranium, it's not the same thing as beneficiating diamonds, which is one of other resources where you essentially just need to have somebody who can cut it and polish it and so on. But when you look at beneficiating uranium, you really need to set up an industry around it that's powered by multi-skilled technologies. Right. The reason why you're finding a lot of these products from South Korea, from China, whether it's cell phones, it's cars, it's steel and so on, it's because these are spin-offs of their nuclear power programs.
Well, that brings us to the end of this discussion. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and sharing your insights on how African economies can benefit from China's growing trade in services. Listeners, you can subscribe to our online newsletter on CGTN or Substack to get more insights on China-Africa relations. Just search China-Africa Talk. For now, it's goodbye. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others. Post it on social media or leave a rating and review. Thanks again. See you next time.